The knife gleamed in the kitchen light, trembling in Marcus Bennett's grip. His wife, Shayla, stood frozen by the counter, her phone still glowing with the business incorporation papers she'd just signed, without his permission. Their blind 7-year-old son, Elijah, sat at the table behind them, head tilted, sensing the terrible electricity crackling through the air. "Daddy," the boy whispered. Marcus couldn't answer. The rage that had been building for months, watching her slip away into dreams that didn't include him, finally found its terrible focus. In that moment, between the before and after, he made a choice that would orphan 6 children and destroy 2 families forever. Marcus Antoine Bennett *** was born on February 14, 1985, in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois, where the ghosts of the Great Migration still whispered through brownstone corridors. His father had been a factory supervisor, his mother a church secretary. People who believed in hard work, tradition, and the sanctity of a man providing for his household. Marcus absorbed these values like gospel, carrying them into adulthood with the weight of ancestral expectation pressing against his spine. At 39, Marcus worked as a regional manager for a logistics company, a position he'd clawed his way into through 12-hour days and swallowed pride. He wore his responsibilities like armor: provider, protector, patriarch. His jawline was strong, carved from the same stubbornness that kept him grinding when other men quit. But lately, there was something haunted in his dark brown eyes, a desperation that flickered when he thought no one was watching. Shayla Marie Bennett ***, née Williams, was born on August 3, 1987, in Atlanta, Georgia, in a neighborhood where possibilities felt as vast as the summer sky. Her grandmother had been a seamstress who could transform scraps into beauty, teaching young Shayla that creativity was a form of freedom. Shayla had carried that lesson north when she married Marcus at 23, believing love and ambition could coexist in the same household. Now 37, Shayla was a study in controlled chaos, natural hair piled into an intricate twist, fingers often stained with the essential oils she mixed in their basement. She was mother to 6 children. Destiny, 16, Marcus Jr., 14, Ava, 11, Elijah, 7, born with congenital blindness, Isaiah, 5, and Zoe, 3. Each child represented a year when her dreams got pushed further into the future, until recently, when she decided the future couldn't wait anymore. The Bennett home sat in Chatham, a South Side Chicago neighborhood where black families had built equity and identity for generations. Their 3-bedroom bungalow was modest but well-kept, with a front porch where Marcus used to sit with his father-in-law, discussing politics and possibilities. Inside, the walls were decorated with family photos documenting a love story that once seemed unbreakable: Marcus and Shayla on their wedding day, her in ivory lace, him in a crisp black suit, both of them young and certain. But photographs lie through omission. They don't capture the slow erosion of intimacy, the nights when conversation died over dinner, the way Marcus's jaw tightened whenever Shayla mentioned her business ideas. They don't show how provision became his only language of love, or how Shayla's need for identity beyond motherhood felt like betrayal to a man raised to believe a woman's fulfillment should come from supporting her husband's vision. The basement was Shayla's sanctuary. Shelves lined with amber bottles, notebooks filled with formulas for natural hair and skincare products. She'd started mixing them 2 years ago, initially just for the family, then for church friends, then for a growing list of customers who swore by her rosemary growth serum and her shea butter face cream. What began as a hobby had evolved into something dangerous: hope. Marcus and Shayla met at a community college in 2006, both working part-time jobs while chasing degrees they'd eventually abandon for more immediate survival. Marcus had noticed her in the library, head bent over an entrepreneurship textbook, doodling business logos in the margins. He'd approached with confidence borrowed from his father's teachings: a real man pursues what he wants. Their courtship was a whirlwind of South Side dates. Harold's Chicken Shack, Navy Pier sunsets, late-night conversations where they built imaginary empires together. Marcus promised her security, Shayla promised him partnership. They married in a small ceremony at her family's church in Atlanta, with both sets of parents beaming, believing this union would elevate both families. The first crack appeared during Shayla's first pregnancy. She'd wanted to finish her associate's degree, but Marcus insisted she focus on preparing for motherhood. "I'll take care of everything," he'd said, and he had, worked double shifts, paid every bill, wore his exhaustion like a badge of honor. Shayla gave birth to Destiny in their cramped studio apartment, and with her daughter came a new understanding: her dreams would always be secondary to practical needs. Children arrived in rapid succession, each one narrowing Shayla's world while expanding Marcus's sense of purpose. He climbed the corporate ladder at the logistics company, moving from warehouse supervisor to regional manager. His income grew, and they moved to the Chatham house when Marcus Jr. was 5. It should have been a triumph, proof that the formula worked, that his father's wisdom held true. But Shayla felt herself disappearing. Between diaper changes and school pickups, homework help and dinner preparation, she'd become a function rather than a person. The women at church would praise her. 6 children. Such a blessing. You make it look easy. Not knowing, she cried sometimes in the shower, mourning the parts of herself that had dissolved in service to everyone else's needs. Elijah's blindness had been the breaking point that paradoxically brought clarity. Born with optic nerve hypoplasia, he'd never seen his mother's face, and something about that devastated Shayla in ways she couldn't articulate. She'd hold him in the dark nursery, both of them trapped in different kinds of blindness, and she'd whisper promises: "I'm going to be someone you're proud of. Someone you can hear the strength in." Marcus had interpreted Elijah's condition differently, as a test of his ability to provide, to protect, to manage yet another challenge through sheer force of will. He'd researched schools for the blind, advocated for resources, worked even longer hours to cover specialist appointments. But he'd never asked what Shayla needed, because in his framework, her needs were his to define and meet. 2 years ago, Shayla's younger sister, Tanisha, had visited from Atlanta. Tanisha owned a small boutique and had built it from nothing, posting on Instagram, selling at pop-ups, gradually expanding. Watching her sister's autonomy sparked something primal in Shayla, a hunger she tried to bury beneath maternal duty. She'd started mixing her products in earnest after that visit. Marcus had been dismissive at first, calling it a cute hobby, asking when she'd have time between taking care of the house. But Shayla persisted, staying up after everyone slept, building a small customer base through word of mouth and Facebook. Her Divine Roots Naturals products were genuinely good, and people noticed. The tension escalated when Shayla suggested using their tax refund to purchase inventory in bulk and register as an LLC. Marcus had exploded. Accused her of being selfish, of prioritizing vanity over family. "I provide everything we need. Why isn't that enough?" The question hung between them like an indictment, because the answer, "I need to be more than your dependent," felt like a rejection of everything he believed about love and duty. Marcus's father had died the previous year, and his mother now lived in a nursing facility, her mind retreating into dementia. The loss had hardened something in Marcus, made him cling more desperately to traditional roles as anchors against chaos. His father had never let his mother work outside the home, and they'd been happy, hadn't they? The model had worked for generations. Why was Shayla trying to fix what wasn't broken? The shift began subtly, in the space between words. Marcus started monitoring Shayla's phone time, noting when she'd disappear into the basement for hours. He'd find receipts for supplies she'd ordered, amounts that seemed extravagant when he was working 60-hour weeks to keep them comfortable. When he'd confront her, she'd grow defensive, saying she was using money from her product sales, but he'd point out that household money was his money, generated by his labor. Shayla began lying, small lies at first, about where she was going, who she was meeting. She'd tell Marcus she was taking Zoe to the park but would actually be at a pop-up shop downtown, selling her products. The deception gnawed at her, but so did the alternative, asking permission to exist beyond the roles he'd assigned her. Their eldest daughter, Destiny, watched the marriage deteriorate with 16-year-old clarity. She'd hear her parents arguing through the walls, her father's voice rising in that controlled rage he'd perfected, her mother's responses growing sharper, less apologetic. Destiny started spending more time at her friend's house, instinctively creating distance from the coming storm. Marcus Jr., 14 and perceptive in the way of middle children, tried to mediate, bringing his father coffee when he seemed stressed, helping his mother with the younger kids to give her more time. But you can't fix a foundation that's cracking from within. The breaking point began in February, around Marcus's birthday. Shayla had planned a small celebration, but that afternoon, she'd received a call from a boutique owner interested in carrying her products. The meeting went long, and she'd arrived home 2 hours late, forgetting the cake, forgetting everything except the electric possibility of her business expanding. Marcus was sitting in the dark living room when she entered. The children had been fed by Destiny, put to bed by Marcus Jr. He didn't yell. He simply asked, "Where were you?" And when she explained, his face did something terrible, collapsed inward, revealing the terrified man beneath the provider's mask. "This is more important than our family?" he'd asked, voice breaking. "This is for our family," Shayla had replied, but they were speaking different languages, always had been. After that night, Marcus began researching Shayla's activities with forensic intensity. He checked her browser history, found her business plan document, discovered she'd been taking online courses about scaling small businesses. Each discovery felt like evidence of betrayal. She was preparing to leave him, to not need him, to make him obsolete. He started coming home at random times, checking if she was where she said she'd be. When she'd ask why he didn't trust her, he'd frame it as concern, as love, as the protective instinct any good husband would have. But Shayla felt the noose tightening. In late April, Marcus found the LLC paperwork, articles of incorporation for Divine Roots Naturals, LLC, with only Shayla's name listed. She'd used money from her sales to file without telling him. When he confronted her, she was defiant for the first time in their marriage. "I didn't need your permission," she'd said, and those 6 words destroyed something irreparable in Marcus's psyche. The house became a Cold War zone. Marcus stopped sleeping in their bedroom, claiming the couch helped his back. He'd speak to Shayla only about logistics, what the kids needed, when bills were due. But behind his silence, a terrible plan was forming, rooted in a logic that made sense only to a man who'd equated control with love for so long he couldn't distinguish between the two. Sunday, May 12, Mother's Day. Shayla's sister Tanisha had traveled up from Atlanta with her husband, planning a family celebration. The house was full of noise and life, children playing in the backyard, Destiny helping prepare dinner, Marcus Jr. teaching Elijah a new song on the piano they'd sacrificed to buy. Marcus had taken a rare day off, attempting normalcy, but the effort showed in his rigid posture, the way he gripped his beer bottle. Tanisha had brought Shayla a gift. A professionally designed logo for Divine Roots Naturals and labels printed on premium stock. "Your business is about to blow up, sis," Tanisha had said, hugging Shayla in the kitchen while Marcus watched from the doorway. After dinner, Tanisha pulled out her laptop to show Shayla her boutique's expansion plans, talking excitedly about wholesale opportunities, online platforms, growth strategies. The two sisters hunched over the screen, Shayla's eyes bright with possibility, and Marcus felt himself becoming invisible in his own home. He walked outside where the older kids were playing basketball. Marcus Jr. ran up, excited. "Dad, Coach said I might make varsity next year if I keep practicing." His son's joy should have filled him with pride, but Marcus barely heard, his mind trapped in the kitchen where his wife was building a life that didn't center him. That night, after Tanisha and her husband left, after the kids were finally asleep, Shayla approached Marcus on the couch. "We need to talk," she said, and he knew from her tone that this was the conversation he'd been dreading. She sat across from him, hands folded, gathering courage. "I've been accepted into a small business accelerator program. It's 3 months, mostly online, some weekend workshops downtown. I think Divine Roots could really become something sustainable, Marcus. Something that could help secure our kids' futures." He stared at her, processing. 3 months. While doing what with the kids? With the house? With being a wife? Destiny and Marcus Jr. can help more. Elijah's in school full days now. Isaiah's in kindergarten. Zoe can go to daycare part-time. I've worked it all out. You've worked it all out, Marcus repeated, voice dangerously quiet. Without asking me. Without considering what I need. What kind of marriage is this, Shayla? The kind where I get to be a full person, she said, and her exhaustion finally showed through. I've spent 15 years pouring everything into you and the kids. I don't regret it. But I'm drowning, Marcus. This business, it's not about money. It's about remembering who I am beside someone's wife and someone's mother. That's supposed to be enough, he said, standing now, his 6-foot frame towering over her. I've given you everything. A home. Security. 6 beautiful children. What more do you want? I want you to see me, Shayla said, tears finally coming. Not as a function you manage, but as a partner you respect. Marcus turned away, jaw clenched so hard it ached. I need to clear my head, he said, grabbing his keys. He drove aimlessly through Chicago's night streets, past neighborhoods where he'd hustled as a younger man, past the vacant lot where his father used to take him to practice baseball. By the time he returned home at 2 a.m., something had calcified inside him. He found Shayla asleep on the couch, her laptop open to the accelerator program website. He stood over her, watching her breathe, and felt a terrifying clarity. If he couldn't have her gratitude, her dependence, her full attention, then no one could. Better to destroy what he'd built than watch it slip away while he remained powerless. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to work, something he never did. Shayla, surprised but cautiously hopeful, suggested they spend the day together after the kids left for school. Maybe we could talk more calmly, she said. But Marcus had different plans. After Shayla left to drop the younger kids at school, he began systematically going through her things. In the basement, he found notebooks documenting years of dreams deferred. Business plans sketched during children's naps, revenue projections calculated in the margins of grocery lists, sketches of product lines she hoped to launch. One notebook was different, a journal where she'd written letters she'd never sent. He read entries from years ago. Marcus works so hard, and I'm grateful, but sometimes I wonder if he sees me anymore. Today he asked what I'd done all day, and when I listed everything. 3 loads of laundry, helped MJ with his science project, took Ava to the dentist, made dinner from scratch, he said, but what did you do? Like none of that counted. Like I'm not here. Asterisk. Another entry from after Elijah's diagnosis. Elijah will never see my face, but maybe he can feel who I am through my actions. I need to be brave enough to be someone worth feeling. Marcus thinks providing is love, but love is also witnessing someone's full humanity. I'm disappearing, and he doesn't notice because a ghost still cooks dinner. Asterisk. Marcus felt his hands shaking, reading these private thoughts, the indictment of everything he believed about his role as a husband. But instead of self-reflection, he felt rage, at her ingratitude, at her secret documentation of his failures, at her emotional distance masquerading as need for identity. He found her business plan, professional and detailed, projecting Divine Roots Naturals could generate $150,000 in annual revenue within 3 years. She'd done market research, competitive analysis, identified target demographics. This wasn't a hobby. This was an escape plan. In her email, he found correspondence with the accelerator program. They'd offered her a partial scholarship based on the strength of her application and business concept. The program director had written, Shayla, your story of building a business while raising 6 children is inspiring. You represent exactly the kind of determined entrepreneur we want to support. We're excited to help you soar. Soar. The word echoed in Marcus's mind. She wanted to soar, which meant leaving Earth, leaving ground, leaving him. When Shayla returned home, Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table, her journals and documents spread before him. She froze in the doorway, seeing her private world violated and exposed. "You went through my things," she said, voice hollow. "I went through our things," Marcus corrected. "In our house. Paid for by my work. Did you really think you could build this secret life right under my nose? It's not secret, I've been open about wanting this." "Open?" Marcus's laugh was bitter. "You've been planning your exit strategy while smiling in my face. All these years, you've been waiting for the moment you didn't need me anymore." "That's not, Marcus, you're twisting everything." "Am I?" He picked up the journal, reading aloud. "Marcus thinks providing is love. That's how you see me? After everything I've sacrificed?" Shayla's defenses crumbled. "You broke into my journal. Read my private thoughts. Can't you see how wrong that is? What's wrong is a wife who doesn't appreciate her husband. What's wrong is a mother who wants to abandon her children for some fantasy about being a businesswoman. I'm not abandoning anyone. Why can't you understand that I can be multiple things?" But Marcus had stopped hearing her. In his mind, the evidence was conclusive. She'd been conducting a long, slow betrayal, documenting his inadequacies, preparing to leave. The fact that she'd never actually planned to leave, that she'd hoped to expand their life rather than escape it, was a nuance his wounded pride couldn't process. That week, Marcus entered a psychological space he'd never inhabited before, a cold, calculated clarity where emotion became a tool rather than a master. He stopped arguing with Shayla, stopped trying to convince her to abandon the accelerator program. Instead, he became eerily accommodating. "You should do the program," he told her over breakfast, while the kids ate cereal. "I've been unfair. If this is important to you, who am I to stand in your way?" Shayla, stunned by this reversal, searched his face for the trap. "Really? Marcus, that's... I appreciate you saying that. I've been thinking about Stoic philosophy," Marcus continued, his voice calm, measured. "About what we can control versus what we can't. I can't control your choices, Shayla. I can only control my response. And my response is to accept this with grace." He'd stumbled onto Stoic teachings online, but filtered them through his distorted worldview. Marcus Aurelius wrote about accepting what cannot be changed. Marcus Bennett interpreted this as accepting that his marriage was over, that his wife's betrayal was complete, that his role as provider and protector had failed. The Stoic concept of amor fati, love of fate, became in his mind a cold acceptance that he must eliminate the source of his suffering to find peace. Over the following days, Marcus exhibited an eerie serenity that unsettled everyone who knew him. At work, colleagues commented on how calm he seemed. At home, he played with the kids with focused attention, memorizing moments he knew wouldn't last. He helped Elijah with his Braille homework, both of them sitting in shared darkness, fingers tracing raised dots that spelled out simple words: cat, love, home. "Daddy, why are you crying?" Elijah asked, his small fingers finding the tears on Marcus's cheeks. "Because I love you," Marcus said, and it was true. He loved all of them with the desperate love of someone preparing to lose everything. He watched Shayla in those final days with the intensity of someone committing details to memory. The way she hummed while cooking, how she instinctively reached to push Destiny's hair behind her ear, the patience with which she explained the world to Elijah in textures and sounds. She was a good mother. That had never been the question. But Marcus's Stoic transformation had curdled into something dangerous. A belief that he must accept his fate while simultaneously controlling it. If his marriage was doomed, if his wife would inevitably leave once she tasted independence, then he would prevent that future through the ultimate act of control. He would make her need him again, permanently, by eliminating her capacity to leave. The logic was insane, but to a mind drowning in wounded masculinity and distorted philosophy, it crystallized into terrible purpose. If he couldn't be the center of her life, he would end it, and in that ending, reclaim his narrative as the wronged husband, the abandoned provider, the man driven to desperation by a woman who didn't know her place. Friday, May 24th. The accelerator program's orientation was scheduled for that evening. Shayla had arranged everything. Destiny would watch the younger kids, Marcus Jr. would help, she'd be home by 9 p.m. Marcus had agreed to all of it with that new, disturbing calm. Throughout the day, Marcus moved through his office job like a ghost, completing tasks mechanically. He sent emails about supply chain optimization while mentally reviewing the drawer in their bedroom where Shayla kept her jewelry, the drawer next to which he'd hidden a knife weeks ago, when the first dark thoughts began crystallizing into plan. At lunch, he sat in his car in the parking lot, eating a sandwich without tasting it, thinking about his children. Destiny, so smart, already applying to colleges. Marcus Jr., gentle soul who played piano and wanted to be a teacher. Ava, his little artist who drew pictures of their family with everyone smiling. Elijah, who navigated darkness with more grace than Marcus had ever navigated light. Isaiah, who still believed his father was a superhero. Zoe, who called for Dada every morning. He knew what he was about to do would orphan them, would make him a monster in their eyes. But his fractured logic insisted they'd understand eventually, that he'd been driven to it, that their mother's selfishness had forced his hand. Marcus called his mother's nursing facility, listened to her confused rambling about people who'd been dead for decades. "Dad?" she asked at one point, mistaking his voice. "Did you fix the porch like you promised?" "Yes, Ma," Marcus lied. "Everything's fixed." He drove home at 4 p.m., earlier than usual. Shayla was in the bedroom, trying on outfits for the orientation, wanting to look professional. She smiled when he entered, still tentatively hopeful that his acceptance was genuine. "Which one?" she asked, holding up 2 blouses. "The blue," Marcus said. "It brings out your eyes." She beamed, and he felt something crack inside his chest, grief for the woman he'd loved, for the man he'd been before resentment poisoned everything. The kids came home from school in stages. Destiny first, weighted down with her backpack, already annoyed about babysitting. Marcus Jr. walked Elijah home from his school, the blind boy's hand resting on his brother's shoulder. Ava arrived from a friend's house. Shayla picked up Isaiah and Zoe from daycare. Dinner was chaotic, normal, spaghetti and meatballs, Zoe getting sauce everywhere, Isaiah telling a rambling story about a turtle he'd seen, Elijah eating carefully, his hands mapping the plate. Shayla was animated, excited, talking about what she'd learned at the orientation. "My wife, the entrepreneur," Marcus said, raising his water glass in a toast. Everyone smiled, relieved that Daddy seemed happy again. After dinner, Shayla went to get ready. Marcus cleaned the kitchen with Destiny and Marcus Jr., moving through the rituals of domesticity one last time. He tucked Isaiah and Zoe into bed, read them a story about a family of bears, kissed their foreheads. He sat with Elijah, listening to his son recount his school day, memorizing the sound of his voice. At 6:30, Shayla came downstairs. She looked beautiful, professional, confident, like she was stepping into a future Marcus couldn't follow. She kissed each kid, left final instructions with Destiny, and turned to Marcus. "Thank you," she said, "for supporting this." "I love you," Marcus replied, and he did, in the twisted way of a man who'd confused love with possession so thoroughly he couldn't untangle them. "I love you too," Shayla said, and left. But 20 minutes later, she returned. She'd forgotten the folder with her business plan. Marcus was in the kitchen, hand on the drawer handle. He turned when she entered. "Forgot my folder," she said, slightly breathless, grabbing it from the counter. Then she noticed his posture, the strange rigidity. "Marcus? You okay?" "I can't let you go," he said quietly. "I'll only be gone a few hours." "No. I can't let you go. I can't watch you become someone who doesn't need me." I can't exist in a world where everything I've built means nothing. Shayla's blood chilled. Marcus, you're scaring me. Good, he said, and opened the drawer. The knife was 8 inches of carbon steel, a wedding gift from Marcus's father, used for carving Sunday roasts. In Marcus's hand, it became something else. The physical manifestation of his need to control what was slipping away. Put that down, Shayla said, backing toward the hallway. The kids are upstairs. Marcus, think about the kids. I am thinking about them, Marcus said, advancing slowly. I'm thinking about how you are going to destroy this family. How you are going to teach our daughters that being a wife and mother isn't enough. How you are going to emasculate our sons by showing them their father couldn't keep his own house in order. That's your fear talking, not reality. Don't tell me what's real. Marcus's voice rose, and upstairs, Destiny heard, felt ice flood her veins. She ran to the younger kids' rooms, started ushering them into her bedroom, whispering urgently for them to be quiet. In the kitchen, Shayla tried another approach, her voice shaking but measured. Marcus, I know you're hurting. I know my wanting more feels like rejection. But it's not. You're a good father. A good provider. But I'm dying inside. Can't you see that? I'm disappearing, and I'm just asking to exist again. You exist through them, Marcus said, gesturing toward the ceiling where their children were hiding. Through us. That's what family means. That's what my mother understood, what your grandmother understood. But you think you're special. You think the old ways don't apply to you. The old ways? Shayla's terror was mixing with anger now. The old ways kept women trapped. Made them property. Is that what I am to you, Marcus? Property? The word struck him like a slap. I've only ever tried to love you. This isn't love. Shayla screamed, her control breaking. Love doesn't corner me in my own kitchen with a knife. Love doesn't go through my journals. Love doesn't demand I shrink myself so you can feel big. Elijah's voice carried down from upstairs, Mommy. His supersonic hearing had caught her scream, had sensed the wrongness. The sound of his blind son calling for his mother did something to Marcus. The knife lowered slightly. Shayla saw her chance, lunged for the back door, but Marcus was faster, grabbing her arm, spinning her back. Don't run from me, he hissed. Don't you dare run from me. Let go. The struggle was brief, violent. Shayla fought, clawed at his face, screamed for the children to call 911. Upstairs, Destiny was whispering frantically into her phone while holding Zoe, who was crying. Marcus Jr. had barricaded the bedroom door, was holding Elijah and Isaiah, telling them everything would be okay even though his own tears contradicted the promise. In the kitchen, Marcus's rage and grief collided. He thought about his father, who'd never lost control of his household. He thought about the men at church who joked about keeping their wives in line. He thought about everybody who'd ever said, women don't know what they want, and, sometimes you gotta show them who's boss. All that toxic masculinity, all that wounded pride, all that fear of inadequacy, it flowed through his arm, guided the knife, turned love into murder in the space between heartbeats. Shayla's eyes widened in shock as the blade entered, once, twice, 3 times, chest, abdomen, neck. She grabbed his shirt, her blood staining the blue blouse he'd recommended, her mouth forming words that wouldn't come, the kids. Please. The kids. Marcus dropped the knife, caught her as she fell, suddenly understanding what he'd done, the irreversibility of it crashing over him like a wave. Shayla, I'm sorry, I didn't mean. But she was already gone, eyes open but unseeing, her dreams of divine roots naturals dying with her on their kitchen floor. Upstairs, Elijah screamed. A sound of pure animal knowing, a blind child sensing his mother's death through some frequency beyond sight. The other children sobbed. Sirens approached, growing louder. Marcus knelt in his wife's blood, holding her body, rocking back and forth, whispering apologies to a woman who could no longer hear them. The Chicago police arrived 6 minutes after Destiny's call, an eternity compressed into seconds. They found Marcus still in the kitchen, covered in blood, unresisting. He was arrested without incident, cuffed and led to a squad car while neighbors emerged onto porches, phone cameras raised, already narrating the tragedy for social media. The children were ushered out through the back door, shielded from seeing their mother's body but unable to unhear the sounds, unsmell the metallic scent of blood, unfeel the rupture in their world. DCFS workers arrived, gentle but clinical, asking questions the kids couldn't answer because language fails in the face of such violence. Tanisha drove up from Atlanta that night, her world also shattered, her sister, her best friend, murdered by the man who'd promised to protect her. She gathered the children, brought them to a hotel because they couldn't stay in that house, held them while they cried and asked impossible questions. Why? Destiny kept asking. Why didn't he just let her go? Tanisha had no answer that would satisfy, because the truth, that Marcus killed Shayla to keep her from becoming too much of herself, was too horrifying to speak aloud to grieving children. The media descended, framing the story through multiple lenses. Some outlets emphasized Shayla's entrepreneurial dreams, painting her as a victim of a controlling husband. Others focused on Marcus's perspective, husband snaps after wife neglects family for business, perpetuating the exact narrative that had enabled his violence. Social media split predictably, arguments erupting about gender roles, family obligations, mental health, the pressures facing black families in America. But for the Bennett children, the story wasn't narrative, it was the jagged end of everything they'd known. Destiny dropped out of her junior year, couldn't focus on school while processing patricide and matricide simultaneously. Marcus Jr. stopped playing piano, the instrument now a reminder of when his family was intact. Ava drew obsessively, trying to sketch a version of events that made sense. Elijah, who'd never seen his mother's face, couldn't attend her open casket funeral, couldn't look at what was no longer there. He withdrew into silence, stopped reading Braille, stopped navigating the world with his former confidence. Isaiah, only 5, regressed. Wetting the bed, afraid of the dark, asking when mommy and daddy were coming home. Zoe, 3, would forget for moments, then remember and ask for mama with heartbreaking hope. Marcus was charged with first-degree murder. His public defender argued passion, loss of control, mental breakdown. The prosecution presented the journals he'd violated, the premeditation evident in his calculated calm. At trial, the jury saw the crime scene photos. Shayla's body on the kitchen floor, her business plan folder still clutched in her hand, blood soaked through pages of dreams. He was convicted, sentenced to natural life without parole. In prison, Marcus wrote letters to his children that Tanisha intercepted, letters full of explanations that explained nothing, apologies that couldn't resurrect their mother or restore their childhood. The house in Chatham was sold, the profits placed in trust for the children's future. Shayla's Divine Roots Naturals products, ironically, became sought-after items after her death. People wanted to support her posthumous business, turned her tragedy into a cautionary tale about supporting women's ambitions before violence silences them. But the business died with its creator, because you can't mix essential oils with ghost hands, can't bottle dreams that were murdered in their infancy. 5 years later, Destiny Bennett stood in her college dorm room at Howard University, studying social work with a focus on domestic violence intervention. On her desk sat a photo of her mother from before, Shayla smiling in the basement laboratory, surrounded by her bottles and dreams, radiant with possibility. Destiny had spent years in therapy, untangling her feelings about her father. She'd loved him once, remembered his warmth before the bitterness consumed him. But she couldn't forgive him, couldn't reconcile the man who'd read her bedtime stories with the man who'd stolen her mother's future. She'd learned through counseling that Marcus's violence wasn't about passion, it was about power. About a man so threatened by his wife's autonomy that he'd rather kill her than allow her freedom. About a culture that taught men their worth was measured by control, that a woman's independence was emasculation rather than partnership. Marcus Jr., now 19, was in trade school, studying to be an electrician. He never visited his father in prison, couldn't look at the man without seeing his mother's blood. He'd stopped believing in God the day Shayla died, but he still played piano sometimes, late at night, in the apartment he shared with Destiny. He played the song he'd been teaching Elijah that last normal day, and he let himself cry for the family they'd been. Elijah, 12 now, attended a school for the blind where he was learning to navigate again, slowly, carefully, building trust in a world that had proven itself catastrophically unsafe. He remembered his mother through sound and touch, her humming, the way her hands smelled like lavender and shea butter, the timbre of her voice when she'd whisper promises in the dark nursery. He didn't remember his father's face, but he remembered his father's hands, and he hated them with the intensity of a child who'd been taught that hands could both comfort and kill. The younger children, Ava, Isaiah, Zoe, were growing up in Tanisha's Atlanta home, surrounded by their aunt's fierce protectiveness. They were healing at different paces, carrying scars that would never fully fade. Therapists said they were resilient, but trauma doesn't ask permission before reshaping a childhood into before and after. In prison, Marcus Bennett sat in his cell, a 44-year-old man who destroyed everything he claimed to love. He read Stoic philosophy now, actually read it, rather than twisting it to justify violence. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Marcus finally understood what he'd been too blind to see. Shayla's ambition hadn't been impediment, it had been the way forward, the path to a richer, fuller life for their whole family. His need to control her had been the true impediment, and his violence had ensured there was no way left at all. He'd taken 6 classes on domestic violence in prison, sat in groups with other men who'd killed wives and girlfriends, heard the same story repeated in variations, she was leaving. She didn't respect me. She made me do it. And Marcus heard his own voice in their justifications, saw how easily culture had handed them permission to destroy women who dared want more. But understanding didn't equal redemption. Shayla was still dead. His children still fatherless. Divine roots natural still a ghost of what could have been. On Shayla's birthday each year, Tanisha and the kids released lavender balloons at sunset, 6 balloons for 6 children who'd lost their mother to a man who couldn't love beyond possession. They'd tell stories about her, keeping her alive through memory, teaching the younger ones about the grandmother they'd never known who'd been a seamstress, about the dreams that ran through their bloodline like a persistent inheritance. And always, they emphasized the lesson written in their mother's blood, that a woman's ambition is not betrayal, that partnership requires mutual freedom, that love which demands smallness is not love at all. If you were Shayla's friend, her sister, her daughter, what would you have done differently? Could this tragedy have been prevented, or was Marcus's violence an inevitable explosion waiting for a trigger? If you were Marcus's brother, his father, his friend, would you have seen the warning signs? Would you have intervened, or would you have enabled his controlling behavior with casual misogyny dressed as traditional values? And if you're watching this recognizing yourself in Marcus, in his fear of inadequacy, his need to control, his belief that provision equals love, please understand, you can change the ending of your story. You can choose therapy over violence, vulnerability over domination, partnership over possession. Shayla Bennett should be 42 years old right now, running a thriving natural products company, watching her children graduate and grow, living the full life she fought so hard to claim. Instead, she's a hashtag, a cautionary tale, a name on a gravestone because a man couldn't bear to let her soar. Let her story mean something. Let it be the moment you choose differently. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Would you have forgiven Marcus if he'd been your father? Could you? And most importantly, what do we teach our sons and daughters about love, ambition, and the difference between the two? If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Shayla's voice was silenced, but her story can still speak. if we're brave enough to listen. Rest in power, Shayla Marie Bennett. Your dreams deserve to live, ***.